Welcome back, viewers at home. Tonight I am joined by the award-winning wellness expert Ronald Abvajee to discuss Burn Awareness Month in ways on how we can prevent as well as treat if possible, because not all of us are doctors, and sometimes it's very fair to know when to treat something and when you do not have the capacity to treat something. Ronald, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us, and most importantly, congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the producers. Thank you. Much appreciated. It's about the impact we create in people's lives, and with African Career Summit acknowledging that, it holds true. I mean, it's a conference where I share the stage with Pungzile Mhlambungoka, Tebe Kalafeng from Brand Africa, Dr. Masido, who's the head of Canva marketing for Africa.
Wow.
So when you're sharing stages, the impact we create is felt, real, and is seen. And all I can say to that is Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, indeed. And we are still awaiting many more, because you are doing incredible work at that. But just coming back to our conversation tonight, all things Burn Awareness Month. But before we get to the nitty-gritties of treating and how we can continue to educate and share that awareness, can you take us through some of the most common burns that, individuals should be aware of, and how we can, sort of assess them? Not prevent, not necessarily treat, but really sort of handle, if I can say so.
So when we look at burns, we often think burns is when you're burning on an open flame fire.
Yeah.
Now, did you know that South Africa is one of the highest burn injury rates in the world, according to the World Health Organization? Wow. And this is a report in 2023. And it impacts and really affects children under the age of 5 in South Africa. Now, anything you walk past that you could plug in, that you could flick a switch on, is a risk to cause a burn. So a lot of the time, burns are caused not by open flames only, but by hot boiling water in a bath, in a kettle. It's caused by electrical burns, etc. So we need to be very mindful thereof. So when you're talking about burns and you're looking at how to identify a burn, burns are classified in its rudimentary state in 3 different degrees, or 3 different tiers: 1st, 2nd, and 3rd degree burns. 4th degree burns is there, but that is often when you burn right through and you char through every piece of the skin. But the 1st degree burn, to identify it, is like sunburn, right? Where you burn the epidermis, or the outer layer of the skin. It is sensitive for a couple of days. There could be a little bit of flaking, but it does heal fairly quickly. It's not very pleasant, but it does heal fairly quickly. 2nd degree burns is where it's a little bit deeper into the dermis, the layer beneath the epidermis, and there's slight blistering, takes longer to heal, and is a lot more painful. Of course, 3rd degree burns through all of that, and literally burns through all the tissues of the skin into the muscle layer as well. That often is white leathery in appearance when you see it, and that burn doesn't feel painful. And the reason is because you've burned the nerves. And that's when you need to get medical help urgently.
Ronald, I was busy doing my homework, and I think one thing that scared me, that I don't think a lot of us think about, is I think it's inhaled burns.
Absolutely.
Where when you take in smoke, we just use it, we hear it, they say, okay, when a place is smoky, you start coughing, we understand the procedure, but we don't understand that is also a form of burn.
Absolutely, because think about it, right? When a place is burning, there's a lot of soot, ash in the air, and the air is heated around it. Now, if you breathe that in through your nose and your mouth, the tissue is very thin and moist. And what happens is you actually begin to burn into the nasal passages, the back of the throat, down into, the windpipe, and into the lungs as well. So that causes such intense pain and discomfort that every time you then breathe, it becomes so sensitive. And it's so difficult to treat as well. So you're right, the inhalation burns is something we need to be mindful of, especially in South Africa. Whether you're living in rural areas, or whether you're using paraffin stoves, or you're using open fire flames, or if you're actually using the phone Kong charging devices and leaving it overnight. It might be cheaper initially, but the cost and the risk could be higher. Because if you leave it charging overnight, it doesn't have the thermostat, the heat mechanisms to manage the heat. So if you feel the device, it's actually quite hot. And that could also then ignite a fire. So we've got to be mindful thereof, and inhalation burns is also quite critical.
When you're saying that, I am guilty as charged. Like literally, sometimes I wake up, my phone is so hot, the cable is so hot, and now that you're saying this, I think it's time I take action. against the potential of, being a victim of burns in that sense. But just moving on to my second question, since you've spoken to us in terms of the different types of the most common burns at that, and you just touched a bit on how they differ in terms of degrees and so forth. Can you tell us in terms of, first burn, first degree burn, second degree, and third degree burn, the severity in terms of how it then, or what it means in terms of the treatment process?
Absolutely. So initially we know if you do get burnt, all right, if you do get burnt, so sunburn, something a lot of us have experienced. Sunburn is one where, well, if you didn't wear sunblock or a long sleeve t-shirt, it's your fault, number one. Number two is, if you didn't put the sunblock on, it's still your fault. But number three is, you got burnt. What do? What you do is, it's cool running water for any burn.
Okay.
Any burn, and the rule of thumb is 20 minutes of cool running water on that burn. What you're doing with that is, remember, burn is heat. You're trying to cool that down so that the heat doesn't go further in to the tissue and create further damage. Also, it assists. It really does help with pain as well. And then, of course, that's what you do. And then, for a first degree burn, you could put aloe vera oil on it, aloe vera cream. And then what you then do is you cover it with cellophane or a light cloth, not a fluffy cloth, a light cloth when you hit into second degree burns.
Okay.
Because there where you often get blisters. And do not pop a blister. A blister is there because that's the body's mechanism of protecting that area and bringing in nutrients to help it heal. The minute you pop it, you risk scarring and infection. The third degree burn is the same principle applies. Cool running water, do not put anything fluffy on it. And margarine butter is not meant for burns. South Africa is known as the butter nation when it comes to burns. We are not baking a recipe. We are treating a burn. And do not put toothpaste on either, which is also a common thing people do in South Africa. They put toothpaste on. So one will cause insulation of heat and the second one will cause irritation and could risk infection. And that's what you then look at. Cool running water for 20 minutes. You then drip dry, right? You then cover it with either a cotton cloth that's not fluffy, lightly, or you wrap it in cellophane to prevent further infection. And if it is a second or third degree burn that is got blisters, that is extremely red and painful, off you go to the doctor. And if it is a burn where you don't feel it and it's deep so that you can actually see it's gone through layers of the skin, hospital immediately.
It's quite scary to say, a lot of people have to run to hospitals. And when they run there, some of these burns need specialized care, and you just wonder with the South African health structure or institutions. It's the question that I raised to say how many people are able to afford it and how many people get to access such a care. But moving away from that, you touched on something really important in terms of, we are the butter nation. And now that you mentioned cool running water, like tap running water, there are people who then tend to assume the exacerbated version of things, to say, okay, if it's hot through burning and you're cooling it with tap water, that means ice water can hasten the process. What would you say to someone thinking like me, and also take us through some of the myth prevention and treatments that are there that you feel like it's very important to address outside of the butter, outside of the Colgate? And we've heard someone saying using flour.
Absolutely. Again, it's all the perceptions that we deal with because we don't know better. And when we look at ice, you speak about, let's say ice water or ice, do not use that on a burn. It's cool running water because it gradually decreases that temperature. If you utilize ice, you're going from one extreme to the next, you could accentuate or further the damage with the burn. Because you can also get burnt with ice. You can also get burnt with ice. You get dry ice that can stick to skin, etc. So, it's very different type, but it's still damaging in principle of the layers of the skin and creating nerve damage as well. So those are the risks that you then have. It also could cause vasoconstriction and link, over a period of time, especially in the northern hemisphere where it's extremely cold, or in Lesotho or the Drakensberg during the winter periods, it can lead to frostbite as well. So just be very, very mindful thereof. But a couple of other myths that we're dealing with. One is, if it's sore, if it's not sore, it's not serious.
Okay.
It's more serious.
Oh.
It's more serious. Remember I described earlier that if the burn is severe enough to be like a third or fourth degree burn, you have often damaged the nerves, which means you won't feel it, with your risk of infection, injury, and scarring, especially when you come to second and third degree burns, is very high. You know, we often see that when the treatment is incorrect, you risk big scarring. And the other thing is, be careful when we utilize microwaves. You need to be aware. And the biggest myth is, you know, when we're in the kitchen is the biggest hazard. There's plugs, there's stoves, and of course there's kettles, and there is microwaves. So a friend of mine recently boiled milk in a microwave and didn't pay attention to how long it was there for, opened the microwave door, and the milk actually almost exploded because it was so hot. You know, it bubbles up when it becomes too hot. It exploded onto her, and she's got scars and burns that she's now dealing with. That was second degree burns. So it is real. And the problem is that if we don't treat it correctly, we end up with keloids, the thickening of the tissue, and you might need, if you have third degree burns, skin grafts. And that is a painful journey, because when you get burnt with the skin doesn't stretch. It becomes so sensitive and painful. And the final story for you is that I remember when I was in primary school, we had a young boy, a few grades younger than me, and he actually fell into a hot bath. It wasn't full, it was a little bit of bath water, but the mom forgot the bath. And he was burnt from here in keloids right down his body. And it's so painful. You know, alhamdulillah, he lived a good life afterwards, but his life was totally impacted. He couldn't straighten his leg because the tissue on the skin was so tight because of the thick scar tissue.
You know, I'm so shocked and I'm getting chills because as you're mentioning something like a microwave, how many of us use it and how many of us are aware about it? Because when we buy these appliances, we don't read the hazard section. We just use it. And it could have easily been me. It could have easily been a 13-year-old because, I mean, we don't see the need for supervision when using these appliances. But before we continue our conversation, for someone who missed on in terms of what to do when you get burnt, here's a clip to remind you.
So burn first aid would be if you have got running water available to you, then 20 minutes of cool running water, not ice cold, because ice water then causes vasoconstriction, which is the narrowing of the blood arteries. So it actually causes more damage. So just cool water running for 20 minutes. If you don't have running water available, you would then submerge the body part or whatever it is, unless it's not a face, into a bucket of water, and then you would change that water because obviously the heat evaporates into the area and that water would warm up. So you will continuously then change the bucket to make sure that you have the whole cooling effect. Then there are certain products available on the market that you could use. Those are cooling agents. So if the patient gets burnt within the first 4 hours, you would then put that on to cool down the burn. That would be first aid. But then do not use any butters, no flour, no eggs. We have heard of all these things because these are not first aid. Those are just baking aids. So first aid is 20 minutes, cool running water and nothing else. If it falls under a specific category, when to seek medical help, then you would then go to a hospital. If it is a minor burn, you would just cover it because of the nerve endings being exposed and that being painful. But ideally, we'll say go to the closest clinic or health facility, let them tell you this is nothing to worry about, and then instead of you sitting on a wound, that then actually needs proper medical care. So covering the burn is part of first aid after you have cooled it down. Because you would remove whatever is there and then you would use a clean cloth. So it could be a clean towel or a clean t-shirt or clean whatever to cover it, but make sure that whatever you're going to put on doesn't adhere, because you don't want the situation where you have now cooled down the burn, they get to the hospital within an hour and then the dressing or whatever you put on there is stuck. So ideally we would say if you're going to cover, use cling wrap, glad wrap, whatever plastic clear one that you've got available, or a wet towel. So if you're going to cover it, make sure that whatever you're covering with is wet so that it doesn't stick.
Interesting. And I'm just in awe. I don't think I'm the only one actually who is in awe with regards to how easily we can, you know, fall victim to burns in that light. But just looking in terms of what is there, what was never there, and what is yet to come when it comes to the advancement of treatment. Can you share a bit on, are there any, and if they are, how can they, you know, continue to improve outcomes of burn victims?
The thing here is prevention and awareness is always better than treatment.
Okay.
So one is, I mean, did you know, in the UK, that's just one area where they did a study on, in 2022 and 2023 that in the winter periods, due to electrical devices like electric blankets, there was a 50% increase in burns.
Huh.
So I know a lot of people sleep with electric blankets on at night. So it's risky. And it won't happen to me. 50-50 is a bit of risky for my side. I'm not saying don't warm your bed up. Hot water bottles are at risk. So again, as you pour the water in and close it, it's all about awareness. And the last thing is you've got to educate and inform your children. With children under the age of 5 being impacted most. And how often are we on our phones? South Africans spend 3 hours and 43 minutes on their mobile phones on social media a day. If you are in the kitchen preparing tea and the kettle's boiling and you tell your child, just go and take the kettle and pour. If the child can't even see over the counter, or they barely can, and they have to hold this weight, and that falls onto them, they're going to burn to a second and third degree burn. So awareness, plug points, lighting is so absolutely critical. But then we have to look further. Technology advancements, if you have gotten burned. So we know that a product such as a burn shield is critically important. There's variations on that as well. But essentially it's a soothing, non-fluffy, medicated layer. It's like aloe vera soap, but it's got other chemical properties in it that really help recovery, especially with the initial stages of the burn. Because the one thing is you want to control that burn does not spread, especially deeper into the different skin layers, and then you have to go and seek help if it is that severe. When we look at what happens when you do seek help, if the burn is a third-degree burn, we speak about skin grafts. You know, do you know that people donate their skin as organ donors for that? Do you know that they utilize pig skin in certain areas? Others utilize fish skin as well, just to help with that recovery and on the graft process. So the research is showing that this is helping a lot because the scarring is real. The issue of burns is that it doesn't just impact you physically, it impacts you mentally. It impacts your psyche, it impacts the approach that you take to the world. It could impact your confidence. So the psychological and emotional impacts burn deeper than what a burn does on the surface of your skin.
Now you mentioned quite a very important thing in terms of educating our children. But then how does that conversation even start? Because you see with an adult you're able to see the thing and you're able to, you know, listen through the conversation. But with kids, how do you then instill that cautiousness around appliances, around hot water, around just ideally burning?
You got to take them on this journey with you.
Okay.
The same way that you educate kids on if someone touches you or they hug you and they touch your back, it's okay. But if they touch you on the back end, on the child's buttocks, that's not okay. So the only way the child will know is when you sit and educate the child. When you're making tea, if you educate them that you move away from the kettle, don't put your face over when you see the steam coming up in the last bit. Wait. If it's adult not with you, you wait. If someone says to you, go pick up the kettle, you say no, it's not safe. When you're pouring it, pay attention. Be mindful. If you are in the kitchen and your child is in the kitchen, you're saying, and you're on your phone, no, just do this, this, and this, but it's hot, it's hot. You're right, the child doesn't have context. You need to take that child on a journey. Even if you utilize water, you always ask, is the water hot or is it too cold? Is it okay? Many women and men go for hair treatments and to the hairdresser. And when they putting the water over your hair, when they're washing your hair, what do they ask you? Is the temperature okay? So again, take the child and say, this is cold, this is cool. Yes, no. Okay. And then gradually increase it and say, is this comfortable, not comfortable? It's getting hotter.
Okay.
And those kinds of nuances. And that's how you teach a child. Stoves, my goodness. Heaters, even worse. But educate and inform, and that way the child will become au fait with what is dangerous and risky versus what is okay and unsafe. And
I had to ask that because I can imagine if you're going to teach your child, I'm thinking to myself, I would say, it's going to hurt you. But you know, a child, when they think of hurt, they're trying to find out, okay, what is this hurt? I want to experience this hurt. But now when you're putting it in terms of understanding the temperatures, I think this brings the whole, you know, cognitiveness within the child to understand that, okay, this temperature is something that I should be cautious about. But this one, I think, you know, all these kind of ideals that really can be embedded in the child's, you know, thinking process. But away from that, before we close off our conversation tonight, I'd like to ask from you, are there any resources and programs you can share with our viewers at home in terms of they can further the conversation outside of our conversation tonight? And also, any advice for emotional, as you mentioned earlier on, the burn victims goes to not just the physical pain, but also the emotional pain. What advice can you give in terms of us being the support system for that victim emotionally and physically?
Well, what is, know where your nearest medical facility is. Whether it's a clinic, a doctor, a hospital, a nurse, know where they are. Also have emergency numbers on your phone. Absolutely critical. But with the advent of digital technologies, there's a lot of pharmacies that now have access to nurses digitally. It's called telehealth and telemedicine. You could even, if you're on the low-income health insurance, you could even have access to that. The next thing is make sure that you have, if there's no budget or money to get burn shield or anything of the sort, just make sure that you keep pieces of non-fluffy cotton around somewhere within a first aid kit or area, because then you'll actually apply that onto the burn if you don't have burn shield. And then lastly, when it comes to those associations, lastly, there's Burns SA. There's a couple of NGOs out there that support burn victims, especially those third-degree severe burn cases, and they do a lot of awareness education and have a lot of access to materials and so forth. And lastly, SADAG, South African Depression Anxiety Group. They offer psychosocial counseling. It's free, 24 hours, confidential, that you could call into in all our languages, and they do a lot of social campaigns to support and assist.
Now, closing our conversation, I know this year's theme, catching on from, previous conversation, being mindful. What message would you like to drive home around Burn Awareness Month?
The risk of what you do to get the immediate need of getting warm in winter doesn't supersede the risk of not being aware when getting warm. So become aware, and you'll get warm gradually. If push comes to shove, do 10 squats and 5 push-ups. It'll warm you up, right? But also, especially when you're sleeping, please be aware of the plug points, be aware of the cables, be aware of the electric blankets, be aware of the hot water bottles. Because if the hot water bottle often, it expands because of the heat, that can also explode and cause some serious burns. So awareness is your weapon during this winter period.
Ronald, thank you so much for this very insightful conversation, and I'm hoping we will implement this and it be a habit in terms of being quite preventative in our daily ways and daily routines. And once again, congratulations on receiving such a very spectacular award and just rubbing shoulders with the grades of our current time. But jazakallah so much for joining us tonight.
Afwan.
Viewers at home, that was our award-winning wellness expert, Ronald Abvajee, sharing in on how you can avoid the run to the hospital or the run to treating that burn, and how we can be proactive by preventing those occurrences. But for now, let's head over to a net break. We'll see you in just a bit.